with technology, often there's a rush to find like the best way of using it or the most efficient. And I think what's interesting about AI is it's actually really personal and individualistic what you end up using and what your kind of workflow with it is. And everyone has quite a different one. So I think when you discover things which fit your particular working style, it can really accelerate it.
Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, the podcast created to help you build and accelerate your own career. And in this episode, we're focused on the world of artificial intelligence, how it's changing work, the opportunities it provides, and ideas to link it to your own career development as well. All through the eyes and experiences of Jocelyn Burnham, who is an amazing independent speaker, a consultant, a trainer in AI, with particular experience around the areas of culture, arts, and heritage, having worked with Arts Council England, the Tate, Shakespeare's Globe, and many, many more. At Careers Unwrapped, we delve into real-life career experiences from successful people who've been through the ups and downs, the wins, the fails, all to give you raw, actionable advice to help you get ahead. I'm your host, Mark Fawcett, and Jocelyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. So lovely to be here.
I think one question I'm going to come straight at you with, it's the first time I've ever talked about Shakespeare and artificial intelligence in an introduction. So what's happening here? We're moving from one of the world's greatest playwrights who did all of their work with a quill pen to a position now where artificial intelligence can write the whole play for you. Where are we heading in terms of AI and what it does in the world of culture and the arts?
Oh, no small question, is it? As far as how culture is going to be adapting and playing with these tools. I mean, it's kind of anyone's guess. That's the exciting thing. You know, I always wonder, would Shakespeare have used spell check if he was around today? Would he have been embracing some of this stuff, or would it have been, you know, kind of antithetical to Shakespeare's work? But I see a mixture of it. I mean, I try not to kind of be a crystal ball on where things are going. I think the conversation is most interesting when creative people start to learn what's out there and start to play with it. And we can learn from them what the future of culture looks like, if it changes at all. So I don't know, I'm much more excited about what the creative people themselves see as their individual futures, instead of what me or anyone else working in AI is kind of telling them it's going to be the future, because we don't know. And I think that the exciting thing about art and the human story is that it's full of surprises. And I think this is just one more of those surprises.
Now, there's an increasing group of people who we look at, we read about, or who watch, who are specialists in AI. They're experts, they're leads in this, but it's still so fresh in terms of a technology. So in your particular case, because I know you started in more of a marketing communications career, how did you move from that to someone who now has the genuine credibility and experience that means that people want to listen to your views on AI?
I think, I mean, that's an interesting mixture of both my own story and also the tech itself and what it means to be getting into AI at this point. My personal perspective is that there are individual experts in AI, in the tech, in the development of it, in the ethics of it, and that should be respected and is amazing. But I think right now in the application of some of these tools, there's not really as much of a conversation about what we're comfortable with as a culture or as a sector, and how we want to kind of use those tools to further our own intentions. So I think that right now, basically it's wide open, because this is a whole new chapter in technology and in how technology meets artistry and meets the intentions of people who are working with exciting ideas. So for me personally, I have been into tech forever. I've always been kind of making silly things. I made my first chatbot when I was about 14. And all it would do is talk to you about lemons and how much you really liked lemons and how healthy lemons were. And I found this very exciting. But ever since, you know, I've always been tinkering away. And then in my life, I got into working in theatre marketing, and I was always kind of the person who was looking for, like, how could we innovate with the tech? How could we build a tool that could do part of this for us? And had like a mad scientist vibe going on, where I was like, I've built a new Excel sheet and it does so many exciting things. So I loved playing that role. And then when things became a little bit more kind of crazy with AI in the last few years, and especially with some of the large language models that were coming out like ChatGPT, I saw very quickly that this is going to be something which is going to be hugely impactful for the world of culture. I don't take a position on good or bad. I just could see that it would be impactful. And I thought it'd be interesting to try and meet people who are talking about it. So within that, I put myself forward just to do like an opening talk about what I've discovered. And then that led to being asked to do other talks, then collaborating with people, and then meeting more people in that space. And it kind of snowballed from there. And then since then, I've been able to make it my full-time thing, which has been really surreal and kind of exciting. But
and some of the people you deal with then, the artists in particular, so visual artists, writers, etc., how much are they seeing AI as an opportunity, something that can enhance, speed up, or improve their work? And how much are they seeing it as a threat, something that could take away their opportunities and reduce their work?
I would say right now it feels about 90% of people don't have a great feeling towards AI in the art. I think that's probably a fair thing to say. I meet the occasional person who's doing amazing work and is, just looking into it and is letting them kind of be vulnerable with it and see what happens. But I would say right now, there's a lot of anxiety, I think is probably the word I would come back to. It is less about maybe getting really into it and then finding things which they hate about it, and maybe a little bit more overwhelm, I think might be fair to say, where there's so much news about it. There are so many different types of AI. There's so many different people are making that it just becomes this big noise and it's just sort of overwhelming. So I think that's the emotion I tend to hit first. Like it's not even fear, it's more overwhelm. And it's more, how do I even start?
It's interesting with that because in my work, I do quite a lot of writing, written content writing for public speaking. And I have a process that I've developed over time that works for me. And so I played around with how to use AI for that process. And at the beginning, I thought I'll just get AI to write the speech or to write this article. And I would feed in a brief, feed in some of my previous pieces. And what came out was sometimes it had inaccuracy. Sometimes it felt a little verbose, but it never really felt like my language. And where I've got to it now is I use it like a creative partner at the beginning of the process. I use it to accelerate some of the ideas developments. And I'd found myself settling into a rhythm where something that might have taken me 6 hours before takes me 4 hours now and is 3 or 4% better than it might have been. So that's my own personal use in a writing space. And I'm wondering if other artists and other spaces are starting to find out for themselves where it works for them individually.
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting thing is that it is where it works for you individually. With technology, often there's a rush to find like the best way of using it or the most efficient. And I think what's interesting about AI is it's actually really personal and individualistic what you end up using and what your kind of workflow with it is. And everyone has quite a different one. So I think when you discover things which fit your particular working style, it can really accelerate it, or it can be something which can give you a different perspective into it.
Let's get down to some of the more specifics then in relation to that, because we're talking quite general terms at the moment. But what tools have you come across or used or seen those working culture and the arts use that are making a difference for them personally? What specific tools are you impressed by?
Yeah, sure. Right now, it's definitely some of the large language models. So there are things like Claude, which is quite similar to ChatGPT. ChatGPT itself is very strong. There are some open source ones like Llama and Mistral as well, which are also very good and you can use for free. And a lot of the time, people in the arts who I'm speaking to who are embracing this, first, they're coming at it from how can I use this as a bit of a creative partner? So kind of giving an idea, having a conversation about something. And that seems to work quite well for them. And often it's more of how can I have something critique my work and actually sort of be a friendly bit of criticism that can say, oh, you didn't consider this, you didn't consider that. That's being used for it too. And then also it's things like accessibility too, which I think is one of the most exciting things about AI is how it can make content much more accessible for different audiences, different people. And when I say that, I don't just mean in the traditional sense. I also mean in the sense of, there could be an academic article, which I know is talking about topics which I find interesting, but I can't quite follow the language because it's very specialized. And something you can do with something like Claude or ChatGPT is put that article into it and say, actually, can you explain this in more simplified terms, and then have a conversation with them about the results of that article. So it's things like that where you're unlocking information that you didn't normally have access to are some of the ways that I find it most exciting. But beyond that, I find it's more about how it works with what you give it instead of telling it to make things fresh. So I find it much more useful if I'm asking it to critique something or to find, logical flaws or accessibility gaps instead of saying, hey, can you go and create the world's best copy? Because that's not normally the best place to start.
And I'm interested what you say about using it as a critic. That's something I haven't used it for before. So we're talking there about feeding into it content. Let's say you've written content, you've written an article, you've written a speech you're going to give. Which tools have you found work as the critical friend, and what prompts are you using that make it the most helpful tool for you?
Yeah, sure. My personal favorite way to do this is with Claude. So Claude has a feature called projects where you can upload lots of different documents kind of into one big folder. And when you speak to Claude, it will, read all of those different items, and then it will respond back to you having known all that stuff, basically. So I've done a couple of different versions of these. One has every article I've ever written in my life and my CV and all of my professional stuff. And I use that as a kind of critical friend project with Claude. So I might say, hey, Claude, here's a new article that I've written. Can you look at my previous work? Can you make sure that, can you give me any pointers about whether this feels too similar to things I've written before or not distinctive enough? And also, what are some things I might have missed? If you were going to criticize this, what would you say? And I just have like a bit of a conversation with it. I mean, there's lots of talks about what's like a good prompt and what's the perfect prompt. I kind of get away from that personally. I think generally having more of a conversational approach for me works best. Some people swear by particular types of prompts, and that's well and good, but I find it more useful just to be a bit more relaxed and informal about it, and just to kind of let myself actually just go with the conversation and see where that goes, instead of trying to think, how can I make sure that it gives me exactly what I'm looking for? I just kind of play with it and see what comes out. And that's normally, for my learning style, more useful.
So we know a lot of listeners and watchers of the show are in the earlier stages of their careers, career starters, we might call them. If you, with the knowledge you have now, were talking directly to them, to those people, let's say in their early 20s, looking for their first job, looking for their second job, what should they be thinking about now in terms of how I'm going to use AI and how AI is going to affect me? Because one thing that seems clear, you can't be starting your career now and just pretending it doesn't exist and it's not going to change things.
Yeah, I think that's true. For my own personal way of approaching it, I encourage people to follow what they find most interesting or most fun, which I know sounds a bit, like we want to use this for employment skills, we want to use this as a professional grounding. But I think you're much more likely to learn faster and spend more time on a subject if you're genuinely enjoying it, if you're finding something which it gives you. And within that, there's lots of worlds within AI where you can do that. So there are people who are using, tools like DALL-E or maybe Midjourney to make comics, and then to kind of write comics themselves and kind of apply their words to these images and create whole graphic novels. And there are communities popping up of people doing this and getting really excited about it and sharing tips and learning things. Anything like that, or making music with like Suno or Udio or something. Anything which you find interesting and you're encouraged to put more time into, you will probably start to pick up concepts in AI from doing that, which will be relevant to lots of different types of AI too. So you might start learning some of the ways it can be biased, or some of the ways it can be censored, or some of the ways that if you change prompts in certain ways, you get different results, all this sort of stuff. You will begin to pick up naturally because you're having fun. You want to play with it. Whereas if you see it as like a textbook that you have to read because otherwise you might not get employed, and it's all this stress and it's all this weight, it's not going to work, I think. You have to enjoy the process.
I think that what we're seeing often with technology now is the creation of new technologies through generations is actually being controlled now more by the users than ever before. So if I can explain that. So when groundbreaking technologies came out, like the telephone, the people who created the telephone said, this is how you use it. And there wasn't really much room for maneuver. And then you might have had motor vehicles, and there was a little bit of room for maneuver. Drivers might have driven them faster or better than the engineers who created them. And as you move through, then the creation of the internet, now the creation of AI, there are people actually putting technology out there. And it's the ones who are using it who are creating its future, rather than necessarily engineers who possibly don't even know how it's going to be used when it goes there. Does that? What sort of risk do you see that is putting in front of us?
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I often say that the most exciting AI tool isn't being made in California. It's being made by the person down the hall who has a bit of extra time, who's playing with stuff. There are risks. I think mostly the main risk seems to be using data which is sensitive as far as organizational risks. So I always encourage organizations that are just starting to experiment with AI to have like a folder full of data that they're happy for people to use with their AI. So things like end of year reports or, kind of summaries of projects, which aren't sensitive, and they're really happy for that to be uploaded and kind of used within those processes. But no, I completely agree. I mean, every time I see something, being promoted from some organization in California, it always feels a bit like though the adverts do you remember Google Glass, those sunglasses? And they would always be shown with people jumping out of planes and like, oh yeah, this is how I'm going to use my Google Glass. And it just feels so detached from the real world. And I always think, as much as I love what is being developed in places like California, they also don't know what our work involves. They don't know the kind of challenges that we have on a day-to-day basis. And so in the nicest possible way, who are they to tell us how to use this tool? It's up to us to actually apply it to our life and to decide if we want to apply it to our life too. So I think there's a lot of kind of agency taking there where we're not just saying, how do I use this in the perfect way? It's much more, how can I kind of, smush this into a form that makes sense for me and I actually want to use?
And I see a lot of how individual people are using AI tools available to them, whether those are people in the creative industries, those looking for jobs, using them for CV development, using them for their own video production content. Perhaps I see a little less of how large businesses are using it and integrating it into the way that they operate. And perhaps I'm not supposed to be able to tell when AI is doing that as well. How do you see it? Because you train big organizations in the culture. How do you see large companies and entities actually improving their product, their output, or the way they operate by using AI?
That's a really good question. Again, I don't think that when we're thinking of our companies using AI and we don't see them, posting AI videos or AI images, that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. It just means that the workflow might be a little bit hidden. So with organizations, for example, they might still commission a human artist, but what I've seen them now do is use a tool like maybe Midjourney to develop concepts, like artistic concepts, so they can start to get an idea of what it is that they want to get to before they then go and hire a human to bring into that process. Now, that's of course controversial because previously you would have hired a human to do the whole thing. So there is work that you're taking away, but that's the honest truth. That's how I'm seeing some of these organizations start to use this stuff because they still want to employ humans, but they want to save themselves money. And that is the reality. I'm neutral about that. It's a very controversial thing, but those are some of the ways in the more creative aspect. But on a day-to-day thing, it's much more about proofing, I would say, logistics. Some people are using it with looking at all their data is a big one. So for example, if you're an organization and you have lots of data lying around from previous studies that you might have done, which isn't particularly sensitive, you can upload these to Claude and you can say, can you read this and maybe find some blog post ideas from this data so we can actually put this on our blog and talk about this data again and, use it as a resource. That's a real life thing that I'm seeing happen quite a lot because finding stories in data is quite a difficult thing for a human to do, but it's a really intuitive thing for an AI to do. And that's one of my favorite uses too, is like just finding it's so nerdy, but finding like a random bit of data and being like, can you find the weirdest entry in this data? And just exploring it in that way makes organizations much more data literate because suddenly it's not just one or two people in a team who are looking at data, but it can be the whole team and finding different things to describe within it. So stuff like that is where I'm seeing kind of change happen. But
can you maybe bring that to life for us with an example? One of the organizations you've worked with perhaps over the last couple of years, and I'm interested about, how they're using either historical data or knowledge they might have about audiences or shows or products that's worked and that hasn't. Where's an example of where an organization you've been close to has actually used this to make a difference?
Yeah, I have to be careful here because I'm aware I need to be quite discreet about which organizations, but I can give an example of some, which I know some places are now doing. Emails is a big one, for example. So you have, obviously email analytics, that's stuff which we've had for a long time, which are already built into these email platforms. But what you can do with AI is go quite a bit deeper and actually start to pull out things like what individual words seem to do quite well with, click rate or stuff like this, or just people are being as creative as they like with it, but they're just going one step further than the analytics that they might normally get. And then using that as a way to kind of give them ideas as well, and do interesting things with segmentation. So it gets quite technical in those ways. right now, I have to be careful because the projects that I'm seeing, I can't really talk about, but there are some things with maybe sharing knowledge between different organizations, which AI can also help a lot too, by sort of helping to standardize kind of reports and debriefs and things like this into ways that people can understand more easily. Also, something which I saw people doing, which I really liked, it was two founders of a theatre company, and they were interviewing each other about the history of working at that theatre company. And then they were having that automatically be transcribed by an AI. In this case, it was Runway. And then using that transcription to then create like a bit of an onboarding document to new staff. So they learn more about the history of the organization. So things like that, or if you're someone like me who's quite dyslexic and dyspraxic, doing things like that can be incredibly useful too.
Now, for every positive that comes out of the use of AI, what we'll see in the media is scare stories. It's going to take over the world, take over our lives, control our work, our weapons, and everything. I'd be interested to know: are you able to debunk some myths for us? One or two myths that you read about that you just sort of slap your head and go, no. What are a couple of common myths about AI that you can debunk or shoot down for us?
Oh, that's a really good one. And again, I'll say that I'm neutral about the end of the world thing. I sort of think whether the world's ending or not, I just want to, figure out what's going on while it's going on. Maybe one myth that I do see is that all AI is going to be controlled by one corporation. And that's going to be, the monster corporation that we'll all have to, elevate to our new overlords or something. And I think what people might not see is that the open source AI community. So these are people who are making AIs that you can download to your own computer if you want to and unplug it from the internet and it will still work if your computer is powerful enough. And these are getting really, really good now to be as competitive as the main ones that you'd pay for. So it is possible to use an AI entirely offline. And that way you can use whatever sensitivity of the data that you want with it, because it's definitely not going anywhere else. So things like that, I think, haven't quite filtered through yet. That there's still an idea that to use these things, you have to upload everything into the cloud and you've no idea where it goes. You can actually have a lot more security with these AIs. So that's definitely one sort of conception that I see floating around. And then I think the other one, again, it's more of a bugbear, but it's the idea that there's a perfect prompt, or that you want to, download a master list or a cheat sheet of prompts that will supercharge your marketing. And, fair enough, like some of them can be useful and it's a good place to start. But I always think that the most useful prompt you find is going to be so specific to you and how you work and how you learn and how you operate that no one else really can write it for you. So it's all well and good to try out different things. I encourage people to try out lots of different types of prompts, but we should get away from the idea, I think, that there's like a perfect prompt recipe that someone out there has built and we try and track down what that is.
So we've discussed quite a lot, Jocelyn, the AI expert. I'm interested in you as a business person as well, because you now run your own consultancy, and that means you have to do the things like get clients, keep clients happy. You have to make sure the money is coming through the door and what's going out the door is controlled. How did you make the transition from, in fact, why, first of all, did you make the transition from an employee in several really good organizations to stepping out on your own? What was the motivation that drove you to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And also just to say, I don't call myself an expert at all. I really enjoy getting people together and playing with tools, but I don't sell myself as an expert.
Well, I'm going to keep that label, if I may, for now. I think a lot of things with advancing intelligence, the expert may only know a fair bit more than the other person knew before them. But so if I'm allowed to, I'm going to call you expert still. But with your huge knowledge base and your enthusiasm and also desire to get people involved, was that what triggered the step out on your own?
Okay, I think it was a combination of things. So not to go too far back, but I was raised as an unschooler, which is a form of homeschooling, essentially, where you have no curriculum and the young person is sort of encouraged to pursue whatever they find interesting. And that was just how I was brought up. And I loved it. And it gave me lots of niche interests. It gave me lots of different things that I love talking about. And I always kind of wanted to return to that when I went into school and I went into careers. I did lots of things that I enjoyed. I worked as a journalist for a while. That was lots of fun. And then I got into theatre marketing, which I enjoyed. And the shows were great. The people were lovely. And the work was interesting too. But I think at my core, I would always prefer to be somebody who was kind of doing their own thing. And I think when I do that, it doesn't feel like I'm working. It feels like it's so cliche, but it really does feel like I'm having fun. And I'm just allowed to be that kind of little homeschooler again and go off on these rabbit holes and absorb all this stuff and then come back eventually and be like, okay, I found this stuff. Let's explore it together. Sort of like you're a rabbit kind of running out and foraging and coming back. So that's kind of why I enjoy it. And then as far as making the transition into doing it full time, yeah, that was scary. And I still kind of waver between thinking that I'm the luckiest person on earth to do this. And I really do feel very lucky. And I think I am to, you do have lots of anxiety being a freelancer and lots of times where you have to kind of be quite resilient and just sort of think, okay, enough things are going on that I don't think that I'm crazy for doing this. I think I can do it a little bit longer and see what happens. And then the great thing is the more you do it, the more you do end up meeting people and then the more you do end up knowing as well, which sort of makes it more useful. The reason I think I was able to do it, I was picked up for a piece of work with the Arts Marketing Association, where we were going to work with some cohorts, sort of groups of people who are working with different heritage organizations and see if we could make an AI tool that could help them learn. That's kind of the brief. And we had some money to do that. So I was brought on as part of that project a few days a month to help with that. And that just about paid my main bills. And then I thought, you know what, if I can, that pays my main bill, I can probably get a couple more workshops a month and maybe see where I go with this. So it was just making that decision that, okay, I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And if it all dries up, then absolutely fine. I'm enjoying this. And I think that it will still kind of inform what I end up doing anyway. But yeah, it's terrifying sometimes, but I do love it.
And what do you think have been what's been the biggest challenge in that transition for you?
I think it is, it's a bit cliche, I guess, but I think it is just being kind to yourself and also being consistent with what you do, setting yourself hours, setting yourself a schedule, not allowing work creep to kind of come in where you're still doing things at 9 at night and you're never really taking time off because you're always kind of half working, half not. So I think being quite strict with myself about when I'm working, when I'm not, and giving myself that real headspace of being able to relax sometimes too. And just learning to be, less self-critical, or at least save the self-criticism for like certain specific times where you're like, hey, I'm ready to jump into all the reasons why I'm terrible at keeping a budget and see what I can do. But I keep a diary, work out, meditate, all that stuff, and that tends to help too.
I think if you ever unlock the secret to stopping someone being self-critical, please let me know, because I think that even, 20 years after setting up a business I run now, having run business and organizations before that, I haven't got to a stage yet where I'm not saying, you should do that better. You could have done that better. So I think what I have developed over time is being relaxed about that. So that's been my only way of doing it. I haven't been able to turn off the self-critical voice. I've just been able to be relaxed about the knowledge you're never, ever going to be perfect, however much you try.
At a certain point, it can be a useful tool, but it's something to be controlled, and it's something to kind of use and kind of when you're ready for it and when it's constructive, then it can be really helpful. But you have to build yourself up, otherwise you will just continue to live in that kind of stress state, and that's no fun.
But without being too self-critical then, and although AI and other technologies given us a lot, they haven't given us the time machine yet. But I'm going to ask you to imagine you're talking to your 18-year-old self, and they say to you, based on your career so far, what should I do more of and what should I have done less, or what should I do less of? What advice would you give to young Jocelyn starting out in her career about the things to do and the things not to do?
That is a really good question. I would say make more things, basically, even if you don't know how, even if you feel like you need to watch a whole load or do a course to be a filmmaker or whatever, just put that out your head and make stuff. You will learn so much faster doing your own versions of things, making your own films, making your own computer games, just allowing yourself to live in that space where you're kind of rubbish at something, but you're enjoying it, and find as many of those as you can instead of the space where you're trying to work out what you're already good at so you can get approval for it, which I think was my tendency in my early 20s. And I think is a lot of people's tendencies. We want to find the thing that we're meant to do, the thing that we're naturally good at. And you know what? I realized there are some things that I'm naturally good at, but I don't enjoy doing them. It's the stuff which I end up enjoying. It's the stuff that I was really rubbish at when I first started. So I kind of wish I'd had more of that mindset that just being comfortable being rubbish at something and enjoying it, laughing about it, being like, I'm going to try this violin again. And I'm trying to watch my language and I'm terrible at it. So that kind of thing I think is useful. And I think also beyond that, probably looking for criticism more, but like constructive criticism. So it's not just, have I published this article in my favorite magazine? No, oh, I must be a loser. But much more, hey, these are two other people who are writing similar things to me. How about I meet them now and then and we actually like constructively criticize each other's work and say what's good and what isn't. So I think finding those opportunities, continual improvement and like honesty from your peers probably would have served me a lot more instead of just writing stuff on my own and submitting it and then getting disappointed when nothing happened.
I find that a really interesting observation because what we see so much of, and we do a huge amount of work in and around people who are looking to start their career or develop it. And they are often thinking or asking or saying, I want to find the thing that's right for me alongside, I want to sort of find the me as well. Yet everything shows that there isn't a thing for you because people change their careers. Most people now change career direction, change sector, change areas of work during their career. There isn't one thing. And also individual people change as well. They change through life stages. They change through relationships, children. They change through their work as well. So I think you're so right there in terms of make stuff, do stuff, try stuff is one of the most important things somebody starting out on their career can do for themselves. Don't be overly worried about there's one thing and one direction I must do. Some people, of course, will do that and they will end up as the brilliant surgeon or the amazing entrepreneur or the fantastic writer. But for nearly everybody else, there's going to be different paths and they're going to chop and change between them. And I think, Jocelyn, talking to you, it's been fascinating because I like to think I'm reasonably up there with AI, but even with this conversation, I've written some very selfish notes for me to go, oh, let's go and do that. Let's go and try that as well. But what you've talked to us about in terms of just trying it, trying what you enjoy most of all, looking at the different AIs that are out there, thinking it not just as a creative partner, but a critical friend about helping with accessibility. There's so many takeaways from this really short conversation that anybody, whether they're looking at the sectors you've been in or elsewhere, and think, actually, here are some things I can do and try for myself. Because the absolute certainty is AI is going to change your job. And so why not be part of that change rather than just be impacted by it?
I agree. And also the conversations are interesting ones. There are laws, there are guidelines, there are ethics that are being discussed right now that will affect us for the rest of our working lives. And I don't know about you, but I want to have the chance to be part of those conversations. And I think the only way you can really do that is to let yourself just kind of jump in and see what you can learn, see what you can enjoy. And that will naturally lead you to a place where you can discuss it in a richer way, where it's less about, other robots going to take over and maybe much more about, hey, I found one part of one task that can be, sped up or improved in this way. I guess to kind of leave it on, like I often think about the analogy of the internet in the 90s and how people, might have thought, okay, great, there's a tool that can save me time now and it's called the internet. And we know now that the internet wasn't about saving time. That doesn't make any sense to think of it like that. It's about changing the way you work and maybe even changing what work means for you and what you're able to do. And that kind of redefining what you're able to do is actually a really exciting conversation.
Brilliant. On that note, Jocelyn, thank you so much for joining us for unwrapping your career and also helping everyone else think about ways to sharpen up their approach to theirs. Jocelyn, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really enjoyed it.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organization to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.